So the GLA is the essentially the civil service for the mayor. So we are an organisation, Greater London Authority. We're a first tier local government organisation, but we're there to support the objectives of an elected mayor. So the GLA has one proper statutory function, which is planning. The mayor has to produce and monitor a spatial plan for London.
Yeah.
But also there's other non-statutory functions that it fulfills, which includes environmental projects, includes its housing function, includes economic development. But all of those are very much at the discretion of the mayor, whereas the statutory function is planning. So I'm one of the heads of service in planning. My background is both as a town planner and as a lawyer, specialising in planning and environmental law. So the areas of the service that I look after include around data, include keeping the business afloat, include the GIS functions of the team, and also the key area I look after is around plan tech and trying to find ways to drive the planning system in London forward to deliver some of those key policy objectives of the mayor.
Yeah. Oh wow, that sounds cool. And so with that, does that include sort of using more software like BIM and stuff like that?
It's not just about onboarding software. There is an element of that, but it's also about taking a problem statement and trying to find ways to address it. So one of the landmark projects that London's leading on at the moment is how you collect data through the planning system and then pump it out there that is relevant to enable you, A, to monitor the impact of development, but B, to structure insight into the effects that development's having or potentially could have, so that you can plan better. So it's not just about BIM. BIM is potentially part of it and part of the long-term solution, but actually it's about the core thing. If you were to ask me today how many bed spaces were created in London through the planning system in any year, I can't tell you. I can tell you a really kind of a best estimate, but actually the space that we're heading to is a space where we'll be able to tell you exactly what the planning system is producing in any time, the impact that's likely to have, and then connecting that data set with other data sets, what we then need to deliver in terms of infrastructure. So that might be school places, might be transport, might be hospital places, but similarly commercial opportunities for business.
Okay, wow.
So it's quite a cool space to work in, it has to be said.
No, I was thinking that. And so like, what do your kind of daily tasks look like within that?
No 2 days are the same, ever. And they never have been. And I think this is part of the beauty of working in the planning system. It's not just about problem solving in a normal, traditional sense, but it's about every day poses different and interesting challenges. So as well as all of the kind of the corporate stuff I have to do around business planning, it involves looking at the whole business process of planning from end to end, often on a daily basis, thinking about what we need to do to make that more effective and efficient, but also being involved in lots of project meetings. Because of my role, I have to chair lots of project meetings, so daily stand-ups, boards, that are around really trying to get some of these projects across the line. And then similarly, it could also go as far as having to look at litigation issues on some days as well. Thank goodness not too often, but certainly in previous ones, I've been dragged into numerous JRs and but other matters that really require you to have a full spectrum of both the planning kind of thing, but also a kind of a systems overview as well. That
sounds really cool. So in general, so I'm kind of mostly asking in terms of like how did you get to your position really? And I think it's just, so I always find it really interesting to talk to all these different people, and then like it's actually amazing how many different routes there are, even though it seems like there's only one.
nobody, well, I'm sure there are people who grow up wanting to be a town planner. But I can honestly say that the majority of town planners don't grow up going, there's my dream. You want to be a pilot, you want to be a lawyer, I want to be a town planner.
Yeah, I also feel like that's because they don't know that it's a role.
Yeah.
Like, you know, at school, no one says like town planning. It's actually planned. The realization for that for me was huge.
It's crazy, and certainly growing up, I do remember a lot of the geography-based subjects I really enjoyed, and it wasn't until my first year at coming towards the end of my first year at university, that I kind of realised that actually the bit that I was really interested in is there's this industry that crosses both sociology, but also the built environment stuff.
Yeah.
And also gives you the opportunity to be involved in shaping what society looks like in the future, whether that's from a business point of view, from an economic growth point of view, or even down to how people might live.
Yeah.
And kind of that realization kind of made me drop my first degree and go off and do a town planning degree instead. But I do think that you've hit the nail on the head, and I'd like to come back to actually in a minute around people don't know about planning.
Yeah.
But certainly for me, I made an interesting journey through planning in that I decided that town planning, after a few years of working as a town planner, wasn't for me, so went off and retrained to be a lawyer. Fairly common route, interestingly. But then once I worked as a lawyer, realised actually maybe the bit that I was interested in related to kind of my whole ethos around how you can improve people's lives was probably more to do with town planning. So I crossed the Great Divide again to go back to Plan A.
Yeah.
Really interesting kind of journey to do, and it gave me an interesting oversight, and with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that actually it was the right thing to do, was to cross the Great Divide twice. And I would encourage town planners to go off and get these experience in other places, because no two planning jobs are the same.
Yeah.
You could be a development management officer in one authority and just be involved in conservatories for your entire career, if that's what you wanted.
Yeah.
But then you could be a development management officer in another authority and deal with a planning application for a new town where you're really talking about the environmental impact and societal change and how people are going to live in this space properly. So it's really, so I just think planning is kind of the most fascinating industry. That being said, before I turn into too much of a salesman, I do think that we have some really big challenges, and certainly one of the challenges I personally feel in London is about representation of groups, certainly BAME groups in planning. Yeah. Because planning's not known about, and it's actually sadly quite elitist entry. Yeah. We've got some really big challenges, because if I was to try and well, one of the challenges the mayor's set us is around how we get appropriate representation of ethnic minority groups in our planning service. Yeah. That's all well and good, but if they're not in the market to start with, how do I recruit them? Yeah. So further back down the line and look at how people come into the planning system to start with. Yeah. Now, planners on the whole don't earn big salaries. I'm sure there are somewhere, but even at the top end, certainly in the public sector, you're not talking a big salary. Yeah. So as a result, we're essentially asking people to come into this elitist profession, do a degree, do a master's before they get their first job, just to come into an industry where they're not going to earn much money. Yeah. So you can understand there's some cultural issues that might not make that look attractive to people. Yeah. But there's also some inherent structural issues in society that mean that actually some of the people that may be really good at shaping the future of society don't get the opportunity to get there.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
No. I definitely, I find that really interesting.
It's a fascinating space. So we've started some of the conversations with both the RTPI, the RIBA, with RICS around what they need to do to start to challenge this. So the mayor's issued a handbook with the working with the RIBA around taking on this challenge, and we're trying to roll that across all of the development sector, because actually until we've got this challenge resolved, we can't be a representative community.
Yeah.
And actually at the moment we don't know where we are on that scale of being representative.
Yeah. No, I actually find, so I joined a sort of a architectural inclusion group for the in the post-Olympic.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a youth group, and it's also very focused on kind of getting a kind of broader range. And that, like, no one had ever spoken to me about a career in the built environment. I only knew, so I think initially I only thought that there was construction. And then I heard about engineers and architects. And then I was like, right, okay, I'm going to be, I don't think I can be an engineer. I don't think I want to work in construction. I'm going to be an architect. So did that. And then I think what I found was, so I'd always, from 16, I was looking after my mum because she wasn't very well. I found that I was in university with other people who had all the resources there already, and architecture does not leave space for personal problems. And I was like, but the thing is that I feel like if I can do this, then I'm bringing so much more. And so, like, my experience being a Black woman and a carer and all of these things, like, I did a project and I priced it because I was like, this is really important. It's like, how can you, like, it was for an affordable housing thing, and like with a charitable thing attached to it, and we were meant to design it. So I was like, it needs to be priced, because otherwise we don't know that it can be affordable. And it got slated. I got absolutely slated for pricing it. And now I look back and I'm like, ha, that's hilarious. But at the time I was like, oh God, like I failed. But I think actually, like it's taken me a long time now, but I've come round to realise that what I love about the built environment is that it has such an impact on the social aspect. And I've always maintained that. I went into architecture with this idea that I could design a new world.
You can improve people's lives daily by improving the environment they're living in. Yeah,
and I really, really believe that. And I recently went to the Bromley Vibro Centre, and it's a sort of a medical facility, but it also has a kind of more holistic. It does kind of, it has a kitchens and a gardens and all that stuff, and they also have advisors to help people with their, like, council tenancies and stuff like that, because they were talking about, you know, like, you can get asthma from different kind of spores and mold and stuff. And I was like, wow, like that is astounding. And that's what I want to do.
There's also really interesting growth in a space around designing for health.
Yeah.
And of course, planning in theory is about assessing the design and assessing the impact, when in part of it is about assessing the design.
Yeah.
But there's a really interesting growing academic area that you might want to explore around the relationship between design and health.
Yeah.
There's a number of people that I'm aware of that built algorithms that will enable you to feed in your design and tell you statistically what the health issues relating to that design are. Sorry, I know this is totally unrelated, but
no.
Space to be in. Sorry. Anyway.
No, that's. I think really my interviewing techniques are not scratch, but it's a very interesting conversation.
It's a fascinating space to be.
Yeah. So I think the thing that I found really interesting about your story is it wasn't completely linear. And I think one of, like, I've been interviewing, well, I don't like to use interviewing because it has
talking.
I've been talking to a lot of people. Like, I spent a lot of time when I came out of architecture. I wanted to talk to a lot of people so that I didn't throw myself back into something else that I then felt was lacking. I wanted to know what I was getting myself in for, like the good and the bad, and then so that I could decide properly if I felt it's worth it. And one of the questions I've always found really useful is like, what were your failures and how did you get past them in your career? Because you know, like a lot of the time you can be like, oh, I failed that exam and then it made me have to go and do this, but then I ended up here and it's actually kind of so much better. But
I think a lot of it was about not knowing myself. And I also have to give a bit of a name check to the person who kind of sat me down and told me to grow up. It was the chief executive of a council I worked for at the time, a guy called John Baddelar-Scott, who basically pulled me into his office one day and told me in no uncertain terms that I was a little shit, but that he had absolute faith that I could really kind of step up to the mark if I wanted to. But it really held a mirror up to me that actually there were particular skills that I had. And the comment that he used was, I could get everyone dancing to my rhythm, and he didn't quite understand how. And that really held up a big mirror to me about actually, if that is true, then am I using that rhythm for good or am I using it for bad? So that's the first kind of the big hitter. The second big hitter for me is taking on board the fact that I don't have skill sets that some other people have. I'm horrifically dyslexic, but that actually comes with benefits as well as disbenefits. It means that I can think in different ways, I can think at different speeds than other people. But if you asked me to arrange getting 6 people in a room together at a set time, and then thirdly, it was recognizing that things like my sexuality weren't barriers to kind of living in abundance. They weren't barriers to achieving everything I wanted to do. They were actually things that could really help me on my way. So I put it down to Mr. V, who kind of sat there and went, "You can do it, but stop being an arse."
I think that's what sometimes we all need.
And what was I? I was about 26, 27 at the time, and I was a jumped up little git. And I think it's often something, and I think in some respects it's a gender thing. I think certainly I've discovered when I've been interviewing people for jobs, you often find men will overspin things that they've delivered, whereas women kind of either put it flat out or underspan some of the successes. And I wouldn't want to say that's completely across the board, it's just my experience. And I think I was that jumped up little overspinner. And I needed putting it quite clearly in my place. And that was probably the start, I would say. Other things, I think learning to take time to recognise that failure isn't a bad thing. So certainly in the project space, we do a lot of work in Agile now, which is project management type, where actually you do things iteratively. And actually sometimes you want them to fail because you'll learn more from what went wrong, and it will make you pivot your project than if you had done it the correct way the first time. What's the point in always being right? Obviously don't tell my much beloved that, because sorry. But there's some really kind of interesting space there. And then I think the other thing that I've learned along the way, big time, has been to listen. Gosh, it sounds a really awful thing, but it was Mr. V that said this one to me as well. But he went, how many years have you got? So I was like, 2. I was really jumped up, just so we're clear. I was like, 2. He went, how many emails have you got? I've got 1. He went, how about using them in that proportion? And it's a really Yeah, as I say. But it's a really interesting one because actually it's that really important thing, isn't it? We get more out of listening to what other people are saying and actually hearing what other people are saying.
Yeah.
So it's not just the said things, it's the unsaid things than we do out of just talking all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really, really interesting. I think in a way, I kind of came to, I had set myself up, I was going to get this architecture degree, and I was like, you know, I'm going to do this. And by the time I'd finished, I was the only black person in my year who got all the way through. And I was like, I can't let it go now. Even though, like, by the time I got to my third year, it was just a train wreck through more train wrecks, and it was awful. But I did do it, and then I came to the end of it, and I was like, I never want to do anything like that again. And I was like, I've been completely shit, and I'm lazy, and I just haven't done it. And after a moment, I was like, actually, you know what? Like, I was doing a lot. I was looking after my mum. Like, we got repossessed when I was in university. I sorted that out. We did, like, there was a lot going on. I got a lot done. And then I was like, actually, but it really took me a while to sit down and kind of do that, like, be the man thing and be like, actually, I did that, and I did that, and I did this.
And we forget to celebrate those moments.
Yeah, yeah.
I take my hat off to you because I often joke that a certificate just means that you were resilient enough to get through it.
Yeah, yeah.
And we forget that so much. It's not really a marker of anything else.
No, because I was so devastated because I got a third in the end, and like my family were like, well, what is a third? Like, have you got a degree? And I was like, I don't know if I have a degree. Like, does it count? Like, what do we do? And I was devastated. But I think actually the fact that I didn't get it instantly meant that I sat down and thought, like, do I really want to continue on this road? Like, I'd done work experience since I was 16. I had contact, like, I had people who were like, yeah, you can, after you've done, you can come back and work for us. And I was like, if I could just finish uni and go straight into that job, but I will just put my blinkers on and just keep going, work myself to nothingness, and I don't think I'll actually contribute as much as I want to in the end. So kind of now at the moment, it's kind of like I have ideas of where I want to end up, but one of my big things is I want to make sure that, like, the me of a couple years ago would have been looked at the kind of opportunities that were opened up and thought, I can do that. I want someone else, you know, like we were interviewing for the youth board recently, and this girl was like, yeah, no, I don't really know what I'm good at. And I was like, I'm sure, like, what you've got stuff on your application here, like you're running your own media platform. And she's like, oh yeah, no, I do that. And I was like, yeah, no, that you need to say that.
It's almost like rewording the question for people who can't answer.
Yeah.
What would your mum brag about if she was to talk about you?
Exactly. And I think that's a far better question to ask. Because I think, like, I spent far too long being way too modest, promoting myself. And it meant that then other people got the opportunities that I really wanted, because I then kind of said, I'm
You're 100% right, and it's one that we don't it's a concept we don't really talk about enough. And I remember going back to, sorry, I was the son of an evangelical pastor, so I had a really obscure childhood.
Yeah.
But I remember going back to one of my teachers, because parents being at the centre of the community, whenever there was like a big birthday, like everybody came to the party. I bumped into one of my teachers at this party, and I think it was my mum's 70th or something. And I said, look, why didn't you tell me that if I'd wanted to, I could have been the Prime Minister? And she looked at me and she started laughing. I was like, what? Why? What's so funny? She went, we did. You were just not choosing to listen to us.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that question of how do we instill that level of not necessarily confidence and arrogance, but expectation.
Yeah, no, and I think that is such a big thing. So like when I was younger, I was in foster care, and one of the things that has really stuck with me is the difference between, so I was in foster care, but my mum could come and visit me and stuff. But there were kids there whose parents had the option and then they didn't come. And then these kids just went through the rest of their life kind of without really being anchored or grounded, and feeling like there was someone who was just specifically in their corner, being like, you can really do this. Like, you are incredible, and you may not be good at this, but you are brilliant at this. And I think, like, even if you've been through a care system, then you have a knowledge of things that other people just have no idea about.
And it's a relationship with the world that's very, very different.
Yeah.
My old housemate is the head of social services for the London Borough of Sutton. Yeah. And he looks after, the area that he specialises in is looking after cared for children. I can't remember the word he used, but basically it's 12 upwards.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's that conversation on and on and on and on and on, isn't it? It's that look, you can do it. You can be whoever you want to be.
Yeah.
Don't let this experience be that artificial glass ceiling to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You should be massively out there celebrating and talking to all the social services people, because
I kind of
know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think I think more nowadays I've seen a definite shift in how it's approached. Like before, there was a kind of don't really talk about it. People might think you're just a kind of damaged child. But now I feel like, you start to have these conversations, and I've sat in boardrooms and, they've been kind of discussing like young people on the park or this design thing. And I've kind of said something thinking like, oh, they already know this. And they've been like, wow. And I've been like, what, you didn't know that? And then obviously they say things and I have no idea what they're saying.
If you're not out there shouting about it already, the statistics about cared for children and anybody who has touched the care system getting through university are so low.
Yeah, and you can understand why. Like,
but you need to be out there kind of shouting about it, going, look, you can too.
Yeah, no, and I think that's what I discovered, like, I didn't want my job to be that. I want my job to be like built environment. I love the built environment. I love that there's kind of the technical aspect as well as the social. But I want to find a position that straddles both. But then it's like I want to do programs that get those kids to the jobs that they didn't know existed, or just thought that they couldn't do. And like even just the kind of like the nepotism that can work positively. That's like, here's an introduction, talk to this kid and listen to what they have to say.
It's massively important, because even if you just go and talk to one child in the social care system that has the capability and capacity to go to university, that's one person's life you've just changed.
Yeah, and I think genuinely, like I've always thought if I could just do that for one person, I would be so happy, because
I'm still going to email Jonathan after this. Sorry, I may have landed you in it. Sorry, I'm going to email Jonathan later and say I've got you a volunteer.
Yeah, no, happily, honestly. Like I'm really glad to talk about it, because I think there was a long time I didn't. And then things would happen and I'd be like, oh God, like, I should have said something there. And, like at university, the reason that I had such a hard time was because, so my mum got ill at my GCSEs. I just was like, I'm just going to crack on with my GCSEs and A-levels and I'm just going to do it. And I did well, and everyone was like, oh my God, you're doing so well. I lost way too much weight because I was so stressed. And I just made it look like it was okay. And then it got to a point where I couldn't admit to myself, let alone anyone else, that I was kind of like not so okay. And then I was going on with this degree, And then I just kind of hit a point, and like my professors would be like, well, why can't you just do this? Like I had one professor, like this was after I'd actually kind of said, like I'm not doing too well. He was like, you know what I do? I get up at 4 in the morning and I work until 1. And then you have the day to do whatever you want, and then you can go out. And I was like, I can't. I don't have the energy for that. Like,
and it's a reality, isn't it? It's this classic concept of you've made it through the adversity, but you've done it by being 100% in that space and putting all of your energy. And you must have got to the end and gone, oh.
Yeah, no, you did. Like, so, and I think the thing was that, so in my 3rd year, my mum was better and I just crashed because I was so used to having so much to do. And then the moment that I had to sit alone with my thoughts, I was like, oh dear. And then I still had all this work to do. And I'd gone into architecture with this idea of what it was. And in truth, it just didn't tie up. And I wanted to do things that were rooted very much in reality, and they took away all the kind of things that like when you're designing building, you have to worry about buildability. And I was like, and I wouldn't let that go. And it just didn't work, and I had to just let it go. But I was like, no, because there's a specific type of architect that I want to be, and this is not it. But in the end, like being an architect for me, it can't work. Like it's 7 years, and I think that I want to have those conversations with the people who make these changes. Like if I could have done it as a degree apprenticeship, then that would be brilliant. But
would you have actually seen the reality of the job and gone?
Well, I'd done work experience before and I loved that. Okay. But because I'd been on the youth board, I'd kind of seen the LLDC and all of that and the councils, and then I'd done work experience, I think, for like 3 years running, got internships and everything, loved them, and then went to university, and it was all the things that I loved about it taken out. It was all the kind of problem solving, like it was still problem solving, but it wasn't as extensive. So I kind of just, I think actually very early on, I kind of thought, oh, this isn't for me. But I was just too stubborn to be like, it's not for me. Now I look at it and I'm like, I should have gone for urban planning, like town planning, urban design. But I was like, no, you need to stay with architecture. You can't move.
It's desperate for people in the profession. So
yeah,
the most exciting profession in the world.
No, I genuinely think so, and I think the people that I've met that have been town planners have, like, I think there's just a way of thinking. It's kind of rounded, and I love that.
The worst bit about it, I will be honest, is that whatever you think now will be wrong.
Yeah.
Because there's always that little bit beyond where you've been thinking that will suddenly become important later.
Yeah.
But that's quite exciting because it means you break new ground in thinking as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in a way, like as weird as it sounds, I got so used to working in chaos that I kind of like it. I kind of like the problem solving, and they're like, oh shit, didn't see that coming. And now I need to adapt to it. Like I like.
All that politicians thought that. Sorry, we're completely off track.
I know.
But really insightful. I'm absolutely inspired by you. I take my hat off.
Thank you. I'm genuinely inspired by you. I think, like it's the fact that you agreed to talk to me, I always find is probably a very good sign to begin with.
But no, you really, I cannot tell you how many children out there would benefit from knowing that someone who's been in the care system has actually gone on to make this amazing stonking success.
Yeah. Well, my plan is to get to be the stonking success.
Oh, no. The success was you survived that pain of going through university.
Yeah.
You made it through that. And actually, so many of them, or the vast, when I last looked at the statistics, they were like less than 10%.
Yeah.
It was. I used to work for Hammersmith and Fulham, where they were lucky if they had one person in their care system each year that went to university.
Yeah.
And the leader of the council, as much as I disagreed with him politically for different reasons, he made it his personal mission to try and get more children that were in the care system into university, even if it meant that they had to pay the fees themselves.
Wow.
The council paid the fees themselves. It was really driven by this point. But I cannot tell you how, even if you just sat down and spoke to one child in the care system.
Happily, like
this
any time. Yeah.
I'm say contacting Jonathan, because I cannot hammer it home enough. Take your success and shout it from the roof.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm intending to do. Like, on the youth board, I'm trying to push through a new kind of youth kite mark / accreditation for youth engagement. And in it, I really want to put in, especially a bit about young carers. So, like, for me, there was a time where my mum had lost her job and I was at school, and to get the young carers allowance, you have to not be in education. Yeah. So it's either I had to give up my education to look after my mum full time, which I was like, even at the time when I was busting my guts to look after my mum, I was like, I'm not doing that. Like, I love her.
Was it just out of interest? Where did you live? Which local?
I don't want any child to have to go through sitting there thinking they're not worth it. Like, I had moments and I sat there like, I'm just rubbish. And, you know, like, even when I was like slightly like in a better mood, I'd be like, oh no, I've done quite well. But, you know, like, there'd be small things, like people be like, oh, it's not fair that you get to go and do this, or like, you know, like, it's not fair that you got an extension. And I'd be like,
deal with the rest of in my life first, and then tell me.
Yeah. But I think, you know, like, it's because I didn't talk about it. I didn't say, well, actually, I've got this going and this going. I'd just be like, well, haha, yeah, okay. But, you know, like, we need to have those conversations. And that's what I want to, no matter what role I end up in, I want to bring this to it, and make sure that, you know, like, because I think there is willing for representation, but I think there are small kind of micro aggressions that end up stopping it. I think this kind of leads on from what we've been talking about anyway, but I saw on your LinkedIn that you've mostly worked in the public sector, and I just kind of want to know what attracted you to it, and equally, what are the challenges with it? Because I know, like, I assume that local authorities aren't always the easiest place to work.
I think what attracted me to the public sector in the first place was actually the principle of the ethics of public service. Coming from such a staunch Christian background, it was kind of almost synergy between that and working in the public sector. So it kind of wasn't ever really a big thought, although I did dabble in the private sector temporarily. There was a real kind of ethical piece for me around working in the public sector, working for the public good and driving kind of that moral good. Can't say it's always the case, just so we're clear, but in the vast majority of cases, you're trying to work in the public interest. That being said, it does come with some big challenges. Yes, salaries aren't the best. And consequently, you have to construct your life around the fact that you've made this big ethical in principle decision. But secondly, and probably more importantly, it kind of drives a slightly different way of thinking, because I've been through, oh gosh, I'm feeling old, a couple of recessions where the conversation has dramatically turned from, well, we'd like to achieve these better outcomes, to how can we achieve more with less? And now, and then kind of subsequent conversations about how can we achieve even more with even less? And it kind of is very different. I can't imagine the same conversations would be going on in the private sector, where I would imagine the conversations to be around what's the business case for things. Certainly in kind of the plan tech space, it's going to be really interesting, because it's going to be one of those really big questions around how do you achieve even more with a significant amount less, because we've got to pay off some of the public deficits. But yeah, so it's those big challenges that have always attracted me. And at the end of the day, although not always the case, it's always meant that in principle I could sleep at night.
Yeah. I think that's always an important part.
But it kind of is, and I think for a lot of public servants, and I have to kind of say this, you must make sure you include it at all costs, is local authorities are only as good as their workforce.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
And consequently, local authorities that have built a strong workforce, and I've seen some really great workforces in local authorities that have worked in very difficult circumstances. It's only the strength of that workforce that has enabled them to deliver so much.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my principle. My ethics, bared my soul there.
No, I appreciate it. And then, so I think obviously it's impossible to, well, we have touched on it, but the kind of moving forward after all of this lockdown and stuff, I think one of the things that I'm really interested to sort of think about is where do aspiring planners move to in post-lockdown world?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting conversations in this space. I'm not the doom monger. I think we've seen worse than this and we'll see worse than it again. I think the question probably should be, what have we learned from lockdown? And consequently, what do we want the new normal to look like as planners? And there's a real question about workforce, whether as planners, because we've realised and identified that we don't have to be sat in civic centres, there's kind of a new working way we want to work. So could you, instead of employing a town planner in Westminster, could you actually employ a town planner in Carmarthen who just comes to look at sites and then goes back? Or does that then further create the lack of relationship between planning profession and the communities they serve?
Yeah.
So there's some really interesting conversations there. I don't think there's an answer. Is it the end of the office? Once again, I think we're miles off having an answer there. It might be, but I think there's a couple of really important and interesting questions on the other side. What do we want the office to look like? What do we want those spaces that we work in to look like? Do we actually want to go and meet our colleagues and just have collaboration time with them? I don't know, a Thursday afternoon of collaborating, discussing issues, and then you go off and do your own thing again. But also, and I think that's probably a more important question, which is everybody is talking about green recovery, green economy. Whatever we want it to be environmentally sustainable and address that climate challenge. Now, who should be at the heart of that? Should it be banks at the heart of it, or should it be town planners at the heart of it? Should it be kind of the people who are driving community at the heart of it? It's a really difficult question, but to quote many leaders in the planning system, I think the only way we're going to be able to answer it is by planners having a seat at the table. So as planners, as a planning industry, we really need to be right in the middle of the debates. And yeah, we can be putting up crazy ideas and suggestions as to what things are going to be. But in practice, unless we're right in the middle of that, we're not going to really be able to drive economic growth. We're not going to be able to drive this green recovery that we're trying to look for. We're not going to have that well thought out and constructed outcome that we're so desperate to achieve.
And then sort of on that, what do you think? So I think it's obvious that there is a need for good planning in creating cities that are healthy going forward, and also that just apply to the regulations, like if there need to be extra dimensions added to rooms and stuff like that because of the like they're saying that COVID isn't going to go anywhere, so if we're going to have supermarket lines that specifically work like that, and like, how do you think that this translates into the job market for planners?
Well, for planners, it's really fascinating because planners do well in the boom time. and planners tend to do quite well in the recession time as well, although it's a different set of jobs that appear.
Yeah.
I am a strong believer that this time we are in a place where we're recognising the strength of policy development.
Mm-hmm.
So for planners, I think that there's going to be growth. I don't think there's going to be the great jobs, but I think there's going to be some really interesting jobs around policy development.
Yeah.
But actually, we're also moving to a space where we're discussing things like smart cities more, where we're discussing things like innovation more, and we're discussing how 5G is going to change how we live.
Yeah.
Now, with all of those implications, there's actually another space for us really to work in as planners. Because let's just take, for example, 5G. If that means that more people are going to be able to work from home consistently, so the combination of COVID and 5G means that actually you could have your house on the top of the Brecon Beacon somewhere and do your job as effectively as if you were sat in a 2-bedroom flat in Westminster, then actually we might have a more diverse population spread out. Then that will have other economic impacts of growth of shops, growth of things that people might leisure facilities, transport connections to all over the country to achieve a more balanced economy. So there's massive amounts of work in all of these. So each of these new innovations actually creates more an interesting space for planners. And certainly from a policy development side, do I think we've grappled with it fully? No, but do I think we're going to?
Yeah. And then also, if there were to be kind of special requirements in planning documents for like the sizes of rooms and stuff, how do you feel this will impact the rate of development and affordability?
Well, logic says that it will make affordability much harder. It'll make viability of development much harder to achieve.
Yeah.
But that being said, I don't yet think we know. Because at the end of the day, a significant chunk of the costs get passed on to landowners. And as a direct consequence of that, we just don't really yet know. So there's going to be a number of developments. There's going to be a number of sites that go against the principle because developers have already purchased, they've already completed their options and such like that. But actually, if you're doing a residual valuation on a new site and you've got a new set of policies or you've got a new risk that people have identified, because you wouldn't have put, well, you may have put pandemic, you'd have probably just used the force majeure clause previously, whereas now you might actually say, and should there be costs directly relating to the cost of a pandemic, that enables you to achieve different residual valuations.
Yeah.
And consequently, that cost get passed further down the line to the landowners. Now, the question then becomes, will landowners go, well, actually, this may have passed in 10 years. This may have passed in 5 years. Am I better off looking to keep an alternative use on the site?
Yeah.
Which then triggers some really difficult commercial conversations, and I do know there will be some bun fights to be had, but do I think that we can yet tell you what they're going to be? No.
Yeah, because I am actually recently, just before this all started, I was doing an internship at Berkeley Homes.
Oh yeah.
I found that so fascinating because I'd never seen it from the developer's point of view before, and I actually genuinely believe that not everyone, but like anyone interested in this whole industry should see it from every angle, because it was I didn't actually know about a lot of the requirements on developers, and then I also, because I'd only ever seen it from the kind of how it had been done badly in a way, how it had been skipped and how they'd managed to get through the cracks. And I think it's really interesting to learn how to make that robust, so that preferably so that both sides are like, yeah, no, that's reasonable, instead of then giving a huge portion for their still contribution and then it being given to one artist to do one big tableau somewhere that then the residents look at every day and think, for God's sake, bloody developers, planners, everybody.
It's really difficult because, and this is the point I make over and over again, is planning is only as good. It's like a high jump. The planning system at the moment is designed that the decision is made and your scheme is compliant at a moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
So provided you get over that bar, that's fine. That's the moment in time. But that bar may be different heights at other times.
Yeah.
You only have to go over it then.
Yeah.
And people, and it kind of, I think it comes down to everything in life, isn't it? Until you've walked a mile in someone else's shoes, you can't conclude whether they're right or wrong. But the planning system will always be wrong in some way, shape, and form. It's not because it's broken. It's not broken. We have some great outcomes as a result of the planning system.
Yeah.
But it's because you're judging it at a different moment.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think again, that is why there needs to be the representation around like in those rooms, around those in those meetings. Because I think, like, I think I am also an optimist, but I genuinely believe that there is an appetite for positive change. And I think most people, if they can do a good thing and it won't cost them too much, they will do it. And
this is one of those really interesting questions. So one of the projects we're running is the Civic Innovation Challenge, where we've ended up with a company called 3D Repo, who are building essentially a way to enable residents to understand a development proposal. And of course, they've just gone into a 3D model and doing it that way. But the question really, and it's nothing to do with is it a 3D model, the question is really, in a world where 45% of the population can't read a map, don't have the cognitive spatial awareness to be able to read a map and translate that into the real world, why do we expect them to be able to look at a two-dimensional plan and tell you what the impact of that development proposal is on them? So we're running this project with them at the moment that we're going to be using as a consultation tool. And that'll be really interesting just to see whether residents have a different output.
Yeah.
So will they be able to tell you, is it just a park bench they want on that corner there that makes the scheme acceptable? Because at the moment, the planning system, I don't know what your experience is, but the number of conversations I've had about whether greater crested newts appearing in someone's back garden might stop their neighbour building their extension is horrible, because people feel that A, there's an emotional response that should be taken into account in the planning system, but B, that there must be some kind of clever loophole, there's a clever science behind this. It's not. It's not any form of dark magic. It's really, really simple. It's how does it impact their lives?
Yeah.
And is that impact in the public interest, or is it just a private interest? And so the 3D repo thing is essentially what small change would need to take place to make a scheme acceptable.
Yeah.
Is it just a park bench? Is it actually just hipping in a roof? Is it simple things like that? I don't know if you've ever had your next door neighbour build an extension, but there's nothing more terrifying than watching the wall go up and up and up and up.
Yeah, my great aunt's house, they built an extension, and there was we weren't sure if it was subsidence or not, and then there was cracks, and so like she passed away, and then we came to sell the house, and then there were cracks, and then you had to get all this everything done. And it was ridiculous.
With things like that happening, you can understand why people really are terrified of development happening next to them.
Absolutely.
But actually, maybe if they could understand what the built form impact's going to be, they might be able to separate themselves from the emotions, and then we can talk about building standards and knock-on impacts of building later on.
Yeah. And I think, like the thing with development is it's the spatial implications in terms of like having a huge building that blocks out your light. But I think a lot of the time when they think it's spatially okay, they're then just generally terrified of developers and the kind of people and all that. And you can understand it. But I think it's like, I think there really needs to be better engagement, because there's such a culture, I've seen on both sides, of like, oh god, like here we go, the public.
Yeah, that's exactly. And it's a really kind of interesting space, and we're doing lots of work around this to try and kind of capture really what do residents really think about development if they can understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really kind of, there's no answer to the question, just so we're clear, but there's anyway, come on, we probably all carry on.
But yeah, no, I think and then yeah, where would you recommend that aspiring planners look for entry-level roles, and kind of what formats do you think work? Like, are there degree apprenticeships? Is it best to just go uni and yeah?
So the entry process, I am, to be honest, for some people I think it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the only way I was ever going to do it was through uni, going to university, but that was more because of my aspiration to get the hell away from my parents' house. But for other people, I am really looking forward to seeing what the degree apprenticeships really start to spit out.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of quality of planners, because some of the best planners I know have really started off doing the admin jobs and worked their way up through the system.
Yeah.
But in essence, I think it kind of comes down to the person.
Mm-hmm.
This is where planning is really interesting, because it's such a broad church of skills.
Mm-hmm.
If you're very much a process-driven person that needs to kind of do start-finish tasks, but also is really interested in the built environment, DM is great. And the entry-level way into that, if you can't get a graduate job, is going through the planning support team.
Yeah.
Every time. You learn so much on the ground, not just about how to work with people, how to deal with people, but also you learn so much about the reality of development management, the nitty-gritty of having to deal with someone who really has got quite a good point, and you're kind of like trying not to gently give way to it. But the alternative, it's, from experience, it's quite hard to find an entry-level policy role that's worth having.
Yeah.
But it comes down to how willing you are to keep trying.
Mm-hmm.
There are some new more interesting entry-level ways with the progression of infrastructure delivery plans to support the expenditure of SIL. Those roles are starting to happen now.
Yeah.
And those are far more kind of normal entry-level roles and junior policy jobs. But I do think a criticism of the planning system, certainly in policy, is that a lot of people get into these jobs and then stay in them.
Yeah.
So people don't, on the policy side, don't tend to move around quite so much,
Mm-hmm.
which then means you don't quite always get new ideas in the space.
Yeah.
So it's quite a difficult space to get into. Policy roles tend to be slightly more challenging, and I would encourage anybody to really aim high. Don't feel that you're not good enough to go off to one of the MHCLG type roles. It really is a case of trying to get experience where you can.
Yeah.
And I'm very strongly anti-unpaid internships, just so we're clear. But the principle of trying to get as much experience, and even in the community, working on neighbourhood projects around planning policy, all are really critical and will open doors.
Yeah.
But it's a different space to be in, yeah.
Yeah. And then I think, what do you look for, like when you're interviewing someone for a role or looking at applications for, I don't know if you do it specifically, but if you were to.
I always, okay, the first thing, I look at how people are prepared for interviews, and I always use an interview question that was pulled on me when I least expected it. But if you can answer this question, you can actually answer all of the other questions in any interview, which is, how did you prepare for today's interview? So how did you prepare for today's interview really drives that really kind of deep point of, it shows you how people think.
Yeah.
It shows you kind of their mental capacity to prepare. And it also shows you whether they're blagging or not. Because everybody always says, well, I looked at your website, I looked at your policy documents, but actually you can start to dig some more interesting space in how people work, because you might actually find that, or I have found that some people in the past have gone, well, actually, I got the bus here yesterday to make sure that I could be here on time and understand how I would get here. And that shows you more about that person. Or someone else might say, well, actually, I spent a bit of time thinking about how how my current skill set relates to this skill set. But there's a whole variety of things, but it shows you more about the person than you can ever imagine.
Yeah.
The other key thing I kind of tend to ask is, what do you do when all things go wrong? And in the planning space, it says a lot about a person and how they work. The first person that should ever know what went wrong is your boss. In all spaces, make sure the first person's the next one up the line. And I often find that's quite interesting, because it shows how people think a lot as well, and their ability to recognise that people are fallible. I particularly love it when people's first comment is, well, I don't make mistakes.
Oh dear. That's terrifying.
That says more than you can imagine.
Yeah.
But from kind of an interviewer's point of view, those basic skill sets are really important for an employer to really think about so people tend to kind of prep for interviews as a town planner, trying to do this. Well, I've been involved in this grandiose scheme over here, I've done this grandiose. But actually, sometimes it's just those core principal skill sets of, are you capable of organising yourself? Yeah. Are you capable of understanding what you need to do? Can you tell me a little bit more about the planning system in general? You've got an attention to detail, are really important in planners. People kind of, certainly at entry level, seem to park it and miss it. So I would strongly encourage anybody who's preparing for interviews just to do some of that kind of basic preparation stuff of making sure you understand what the organisation does, understanding how to get there, understand and thinking about what those important characteristics of you that you want to present to them are. Yeah,
that was very good performance.
I just watched my hands go forward, and all I could see was my dad.
No, that was really brilliant.